Welcome to The One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. I'm excited that you and all of your parts have taken time to be with me and all of my parts. If you are a coach, a client, a therapist, if you are in business or education, and you're curious about the IFS model, you are in the right place. Now, let's see what happens on today's podcast. Hey everyone. On today's episode, Derek Scott and I discuss his Grief Corp initiative and how complicated grief and mourning is for those who have lost a loved one due to COVID-19. We talk in detail about what makes this grief process so complex right now by talking about our own reactions to all that is happening. Grief Corp groups are 6 weeks bereavement groups run by volunteers. Derek has done an incredible job setting up a structure for this for his community in Canada. If you're interested in doing something similar for your community, region, or country, contact Derek at derek@ifsca.ca. He has already started putting up Grief Corp videos on YouTube, so go to YouTube and look up Derek's YouTube page and check out some of the Grief Corp group videos he already has up. Plus, if you just go to his website, ifsca.ca, there's a Grief Corp tab, and you can see how he has started setting up these groups. It's amazing. He must have the best manager parts ever. This is a hard episode to listen to, but what I'm hoping is you'll actually find I'm hoping that you'll find some connections with parts of you that you might be feeling that are voiced by Derek and I as we talk about our own reactions to thinking about grief and thinking about grief during this time. So I hope that it is actually in some way comforting. Also, if you or someone that you know has lost a loved one due to COVID-19, I hope that you will share this episode and know that you have a community of people that care about you and a community of people who want to be with you. Take care. It's good to see your face.
You too. I haven't seen you for ages.
I
You had that
know.
whole flurry and then gone.
I know. My parts of me that have attachment issues don't like it.
Yeah, got it. I know.
Yeah.
It's you. You could be like down the street, so we should like go and stand outside a closed coffee shop together and then leave.
Yeah, let's do it.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Some of our coffee shops, though, you can get food. So we can like walk in, get our food, and stand 6 feet apart.
That'd be nice. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Are you getting out at all?
I'm getting out a lot. I live in the country. So yeah. I like walking the dogs for hours down the empty roads and through the woods and shit. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
I know. I love where I live. I love being in the woods. It's great.
I feel for the folks that are like stuck in one bedroom apartments with like 3 kids downtown. Like,
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Right. And I'm sure you got to be so scared to leave your apartment because you're full of all the people and the germs. Like,
oh, the elevator.
Yeah.
So that cannot be easy.
No. Where we live, there used to be a covered bridge. 1 block down from us used to be a covered bridge, and now it's a walking bridge. And so we go there all the time. It's so pretty.
Huh.
I know.
Nice. Yeah. I wanted to thank you for being available for this conversation. Wanted to talk mainly about this initiative that I'm setting up, which I'm calling the Grief Corp, which is online bereavement support groups. It's a volunteer initiative. And what I want to do is get, a couple of things. I want to get therapists to volunteer, or counselors or pastoral folks or anyone that's familiar with group facilitation to volunteer. What I'm setting up online are short-term bereavement support groups that are COVID specific. So it'll be 6 sessions, 90-minute sessions, 10 participants in each session, plus the facilitator.
Okay.
So I'm working really hard to settle that up, and looking for volunteers to help out. So I can tell you a bit more about it, but that's what I'm up to at the moment.
That sounds great. And do people so these would be only COVID-19 related groups, and are they only, this is part of me is like, this is a stupid question, but are they only death groups, or could there be parts that are dealing with people in the hospital, or like, does it have to be that someone you love
Sure.
has passed away?
I'm setting it up so they are bereavement groups that are specific to people who have lost people specifically to COVID-19.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, it's not to say, Tammy, that all those other losses that go along with that won't need to be addressed and will be addressed and will be welcome. But the common denominator is going to be bereavement due to COVID-19, because it's such it's an unusual, shall we say, it's an unusual bereavement, and it brings with it what we call complex grief, complicated mourning, and that will be different from someone that has a bereavement that's not COVID related.
Great. Okay. Do you want to speak a little bit about complicated grief?
Well, part of my background, as you know, is I lived and worked through AIDS in the 1980s and early 90s in my community. And I'm seeing a lot of parallels now. So what we did in the early days was we found out there was this scary virus going around that nobody knew anything about, and we didn't know how it was passed on, but we did know that people seemed to be dying very quickly from it. So when that hits your community, you mobilize, right, as people are doing. So we mobilized, we focused on transmission as best we could, taking care of each other, making sure that we didn't, drink from the same glass as somebody just in case. We modified our sexual practices, became activists, channeled a lot of anger into AIDS activism, which was both related to the grief and completely justified, because we were looking at AIDS phobia, homophobia. Men mainly were being left to die in their own shit in hospital beds. It wasn't good. But what we didn't notice, Tammy, was that with all of that, we didn't notice, even though it sounds bizarre, we were aware of all the deaths, we didn't notice we were grieving or having grief responses. It was only later that we began to realize how the grief had impacted us. And I'm seeing the same here. I'm seeing, what is it in New York as of today? It's about how many thousand deaths now?
I don't know.
I don't know either, but it's huge.
Yeah,
It's huge.
yeah. I think the number that
And
there was a number one time, I think it was last week, that they said like 700 people that day had died. And that's the number that
yeah,
because I think when we start, this is going to sound terrible, when we start talking about thousands, I get lost. I don't know what that means. But when I'm like
yeah,
700 people that day,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
even, yeah, sorry.
So multiply,
Yeah,
no, you're fine. Yeah. But multiply that by, let's say each of those people has 6 people that really care about them. I don't think that's unreasonable to assume, right?
yeah, no,
That's 6 people that are bereaved.
yeah,
And that may include parents, children, friends, family, lovers, ex-lovers.
yeah.
And they're bereaved in a very complicated way. So some of the things that are making COVID deaths and COVID bereavement complicated, not dissimilar to AIDS, there's stigma, there's fear of infection. There's also, the stories that I'm hearing are things like, my mom died and my dad could not hug me.
Mm.
Or I watched my father die on my phone.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so those are bizarre deaths, right? And what we're seeing in Europe, which we will probably see here because the system's overwhelmed, are bodies being taken to be disposed of or held in meat lockers, or that's not how we want to see our loved ones pass. We have assumptions about funeral homes or cremations, ceremonies, gatherings of people. So all of that's not happening. So that results in a kind of bereavement and a kind of mourning, which is complex. And it's complex in terms of people may notice that they're having much stronger reactions. So anger, protest is common with loss. You can expect to see rage. You can expect to feel rage. Or might go the opposite way. Complete absence of feeling, complete absence of any response whatsoever. We call that delayed or absent grief. It's usually delayed. what else makes it complex? The lack of social supports in the way that we're used to them, the lack of the funeral and those ceremonies that we're used to, the completely unexpected nature of it, the magnitude of it,
Mm.
and all of that. Tell me, if all of that happened to you and the world outside stayed relatively normal, that's hard enough to cope with. But the world
Right.
outside is not relatively normal. This is a world we haven't seen. We don't know. Right? This is
Right.
new. And so, the common response is to loss, any loss. The kind of the first parts that come up, disbelief and denial.
Mm.
Right? And I
Yeah.
remember when you and I spoke one time, and I asked you if you'd ever lost your keys or your purse, and you said you had. You lose your keys, you lose your wallet. It's not uncommon to, the first thing is, I can't have lost them.
Right.
I can't, right? So that's the disbelief and denial.
Yeah.
That's when you find yourself looking in the oven for your
Yep.
keys, even
Yep.
though that part saying they can't possibly be there, you have to look anyway, right?
Yeah. I had my something stolen out of the trunk of my car, and I literally I opened up the trunk of my car and it was all gone. And I literally was like looking under the car, like looked where the tire was. Like you're like, it has to be here. Like look back inside the car. Like, it's such a weird feeling. Yeah, it's really strange.
Yeah, yeah, it can be happening, right? So I'm
Yeah.
seeing that a lot on a societal scale here as well, where people are saying, "Oh, when this is over, we'll have big parties and we'll start hugging." It's
Yeah.
I understand that need to hold that hope, and realistically, we're looking at a recession. We're looking at in Toronto, they're estimating 2/3 of the restaurants will go out of business.
Wow.
We're looking at really significant changes in our culture and our society. What I was hearing on the news this week was maybe wearing masks will become the norm. Maybe we'll have to stop handshaking as a culture. If that sort of stuff becomes the new norm, and if all the musicians and service industry people are not available, or they're all unemployed, or the economy is not good, that's more likely what we're looking at. So those are all very real losses too, and they bring up grief.
Well, you and I talked, and these our meetings are getting all mixed up in my head now. But I do
Yeah.
remember us talking, and it might be the one that won't go out into the world. But we also talked about the other things we do with grief, like whether it's like we'll all, by the middle of May, we'll all be back to normal, or that I so this was coming up for me is that idea of like the blame. Like, so what I'm seeing in New Hampshire, we don't have that many deaths, but when they do
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, one person died yesterday, they were male over 60 and had health complications. And so
Yeah.
what I'm going to admit, and I'm a little bit embarrassed by this, I go, okay, phew, okay, I'm okay. I'm okay. My husband's
Yeah.
okay. My people are okay. Right. So it's almost sort of this like, oh, well, they died, but they were blah, 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 blah. You're like, okay,
Yeah.
good. Whew. So there's a part of me that feels embarrassed by that. And I'm
Uh-huh.
wondering, yeah, so I think there's all kinds of things that are happening like that. This sort of like like a denial or a it feels like a blaming thing too. Oh, well, you were 60, over 60 and had health complications and
Yeah.
ugh,
Yeah. It's what we
feels
do, right? It's how
terrible.
we. It's well. I I hear the part that does it. I hear the part that's uncomfortable about the part that does it. But I
Yeah.
also think it's completely normal. It's how we distance ourselves from threat, right?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So and so dies of lung cancer. Were they a smoker? And it's an oh good, right? Because I don't smoke, so I can distance myself.
And then it makes sense too, right? Like, oh, you died, you had lung cancer. Okay, well, you smoked, and okay, then the world now makes sense. This equals this equals this. Not only doesn't I distance myself because I'm not a non-smoker, but it also makes sense.
Yep.
I was
Do you know the
crossing the street,
expression?
not in the crosswalk. I got hit by a car. Oh, okay. Well, you were walking in the not in the crosswalk, so the world makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So that's referred to by some of the bereavement, one of the bereavement writers in particular, as the just world hypothesis. Right
Yeah.
now, this particular writer, Janov Bullman, I think, he talks about shattered assumptions.
Okay.
when our assumptions about the world get shattered. So in AIDS, we had assumptions about the world that we didn't know we had, which included
Mm.
the community would not be hit by a virus that would wipe out a quarter of the community. Who knew we had that assumption, but we did, right? So when,
Right.
yeah, so when our
Who
assumptions
knew
get
that I
shattered,
would have an assumption that I can go to the grocery store anytime I wanted to?
mm,
Yeah.
yeah. So when our assumptions get shattered, our sense of safety in the world gets shattered, and that response is close to trauma, right? The world's not safe in the way I've experienced it as safe,
Yeah.
which is, again, something that people want to distance themselves from. Do you know the expression NIMBY?
No.
It's short for not in my backyard.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Now, when I was in AIDS work, part of my work in public health was to go to new residents of Canada from many different parts of the world and both let them know what we were teaching in the high schools, because we were teaching their kids condom use. We had like condom relays for the grade 11s where they had a wooden penis and they had to strip the condom off it and put it on another one. And of course, we've got Muslim parents and parents from all over the world that we didn't want to offend, like
Mm.
but they needed to know what their kids were hearing at school. So I would say to them, what did you hear in the country you came from? What did you hear about AIDS? Tell me, every single country. India would say, well, they have it in Pakistan. Right? Like each country would name the country next to them, not in my backyard, right, that had AIDS, because AIDS was serious for those people.
Wow.
And it's that thing about distancing again, right? We need to distance from the threat.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. And if we don't, then we're at risk for being overwhelmed with anxiety or all the other parts that hold the distress, right? So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
of disbelief and denial as buffers. They buffer the reality that the other parts are sort of getting used to, that are behind them. And then we can open to, what does this look like? What do all of these deaths look like? What does it mean for us as a culture, as a society? And from my perspective, what will the individuals need to help them normalize what's going on, right? With the bereavement groups that I've run, it's incredibly helpful. Here's an example. There was a group I ran. There was a woman in the group. She'd lost her mum, just regular bereavement, right? She'd lost her mother. It was coming up for Christmas time. And she was able to share with the group. She said, I went into the Walmart and they were playing Christmas carols and everyone was happy. And mums were picking up their little girls and boys and saying, look at the toys. I wonder if Santa will bring you one. She said, I wanted to strangle the cashier's neck. I had to leave.
Mm.
She got so triggered into a loss response, right? A rage response, because her mother was dead, right?
Mm.
This Christmas was going to be a Christmas without her. And she had parts that were bitter, parts that were raging, parts that were telling her she's over the top hysterical.
Mm.
And when she named it, Tammy, the other folks in the group could just nod. Yeah, tremendously comforting to know
Yeah.
that you're not crazy, to know that this is a grief response. And we're not good at normalizing grief responses as a culture. So that's why I want to set this up. So folks that are in this position don't feel like they're going crazy. It's a volunteer effort, so they don't need to pay. And they get, my hope is, because there's self-support groups, 6 weeks of being with other people who can just get it, and then they can continue to meet. They'll have emails, they have Zoom. Hopefully they can continue to meet with each other and not rely on the facilitator or the therapist.
Yeah.
I think that's my hope for how we can help people move through this, what for them will be hell. Like, we're all going through the surreality of what's happening right now, but they're going through personal hell through this particular kind of bereavement. So that's what I want to help support people with.
I was wondering too about what adds to the complexity of that, with when we're all like, whew, it didn't happen to me. So not only is it not in my backyard, oh, your mom died or your friend died or whatever, but like that distancing of like, whew, it didn't happen to me. You know what I mean? Like if
Mm-hmm.
we all, if we're all in a room and catch cold, everyone catches cold, and then I have this relief of like, well, I didn't catch cold, so whew, like, so there must be something about that too that would complicate their grief, of like other people being like, it happened to you and I'm sorry it happened to you, but we're so relieved it didn't happen to us.
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to that, Tammy. One is the social supports may not be there because this time is difficult for all of us,
Right.
right? And I think when this has passed in its peak or whatever, and we come
Yeah.
into the new normal, whatever that looks like, people that need to tell the story, the bereaved people that need to tell their story, they'll be triggering. Right? Whatever this has been like for you, the anxiety, terror, whatever, having to be at home with your family, domestic violence, all that stuff that we
Yeah.
can anticipate increasing. People that say, I want to talk about, my mum who died in March from COVID. The word COVID is going to be a trigger for people, and they're going to want to just naturally like push that away. I don't want to be triggered back into that time for me. So
Right.
that's where the lack of social support it complicates the grief. The term for that in the literature is disenfranchised grief. It's a grief that's not socially supported. It's not
Mm.
dissimilar from miscarriage grief, or if your son is on death row,
Oh,
right,
yeah.
and your son dies, you're not going to get a lot of social support. So I believe it will be a kind of disenfranchised grief, which adds to the complexity. And the other piece is survivor guilt.
Mm.
Survivor guilt, right? If you know someone that's dead, they died and I didn't. How come? And if you're close to them,
Right.
right? Survivor guilt was first coined, the term was first coined in the concentration camps.
Mm.
But it's a real phenomena, right? And
Mm.
how do you make meaning of it? If two people get coronavirus, one's asymptomatic and one dies horribly, it also challenges us spiritually, I think.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
oh, and
Yeah.
here's a plug. I don't know if you know this, but I've got Dick Schwartz May 6th doing an online Zoom workshop on IFS and spirituality, which I think is really good timing for these times. So just wanted to
Yeah. So
name that.
people that want to do that, it's a webinar. Is it a webinar or is it a workshop? Like a
It's a
workshop.
it's a Zoom workshop. Yeah.
Okay. And then they would just go to your website, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
ifsca.co.
Very close. ifsca.ca.
CA, okay.
Because it's Canada.
IFS Canada. So
Canada.
IFS, um, don't make me laugh. I say it, you say it. I'm not going to try to say it again.
ifsca.ca.
CA. Okay. Okay.
All right. Hey.
So for people that are interested, and I highly recommend this is great opportunity to hang out with Dick, to hear what he has to say. Spirituality. It's a Wednesday from like 2 to 5 or something Eastern time. So definitely
Yeah,
get
3 hours and
yeah,
yeah, and lots of Q&A time. So
great, great. Yeah,
yeah.
to get time with Dick is awesome. So I highly
Mhm.
recommend people do that.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
good.
Especially at this time because there's so many questions around. I mean, for some people, the bigger questions around meaning, purpose. How do you hold on to your spirituality, however you define that? At times, it's challenging. Sometimes it's challenging. The Grief Corps, as I'm calling it, it's a tab on my site if people want to go to, and there's lots of resources there. There's a 21-page manual. There's active listening articles on COVID loss as trauma, how you cope with the death of a coworker or a service user. There's exercises. There's instructional videos on how to run a 6-week support group. So people will be well covered. And I'm setting it up like a kind of tree. So I'm asking volunteers who would be willing to facilitate to sign up for a particular time during the week. And
Great. Okay.
then I'll have participants go to that volunteer's website. Once they've got 10 of them, they can start the group. I will also ensure that all the volunteer facilitators are debriefed so they can meet once a week and debrief what's going on for them. Because in one sense, the self-support group is relatively straightforward to run because your job is to keep the ball rolling and have people just talk. Then you can set it up in a structured or a non-structured way. I'll give examples of both. But on the other hand, what people are presenting can potentially trigger our own losses. So it's really helpful to know ourselves in grief and have a place to be able to debrief. If someone's talking about, they watch their mum die horribly on a phone, that might be what they need to talk about. If your mum is really ill at the moment, that may be hard to hear. That might trigger your own parts. So the facilitators will need a place where they can debrief as well. So that's
Right.
all going to be set up. It's quite a large project, but I think it needs to be, because I think over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, it's really going to need to come into place.
It sounds like you I guess had this feeling of like, I'm so glad that Derek is thoughtful and organized about what he's putting out there and that
Thank
you
you.
are doing this. It's just, I just feel so much gratitude towards you.
Oh, thanks, Tammy. Well, I've got great parts. I have to thank my parts. They're amazing. I guess. Yay, parts. I do. Right? I've got
Yeah.
my AIDS parts and my grief parts. I'm like, oh, we
Mm,
can put all this together, right? We can actually do some. Government's not going to respond. We're not going to get funding, so it has to be a community-based
yeah.
initiative.
Yeah.
And I was remembering, when I was in AIDS work, I was 24, I think, when I started.
Wow.
So I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the elders were the ones who said we need to look at grief, we need to mobilize the community. We set up care teams for people that needed to die at home. We made sure they had 24-hour care. It was all volunteer driven, and it was amazing. But my parents are saying, okay, now you're the elder. Now you need to do this shit. You need to take the lead. So it feels right somehow. It feels good to be able to be in a position where I can be of service in this way, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. So two things we need for people to get the word out to people that to counselors, mental health professionals that would be open to volunteer. And then
yeah,
we need to get the word out for people that are losing people that this is
yeah.
a resource for them.
So let me be clear. Thank you. Let me be clear on this resource and what's available. I'm setting this up specifically as a Canadian initiative because that's my home. And so, Canadian volunteers or volunteers who would be willing to help out with Canadian folk would be great. So that's the initial drive. Anyone who knows how to do press releases or get the word out or use social media, I'd really like to hear from. That said, all of the resources on my site are publicly available. So if anyone wants to do a similar initiative in the United States, in Europe, in Australia, they're very, very welcome to do that. And I'm happy to talk to them about how to set it up. It's just, we all need to limit our spheres, otherwise it's going to be overwhelming.
Yep. Perfect. Great.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of it will be, there's two streams of the how to run the support groups. There'll be the regular support groups because people need to tell their stories. If people are interested, I will talk about how to set up an IFS support group. I don't know how many of those would be viable in terms of clients that know they have parts. It's not the time to start getting people to know they have parts. They just need to talk. But I'll
Right.
set it up as a possibility because what tends to happen in raw grief is you just flooded and it's direct access.
Mm,
As that ebbs, it becomes possible to listen to the sad part, listen to the angry part, and that's actually very helpful because then those parts are aware that there's self available for them too.
mm,
But at this time, my belief is IFS is going to become the dominant paradigm for therapy, right? But until that happens, we need to fall back on the old paradigm, right? Just people need to tell their story, be witnessed, but particularly in this context, get support from each other. That's my hope, that people can move through this horrible, horrible time, this very, very difficult grief, and find new supports for each other where we can normalize talking about individual loss, community devastation, how we recover from it, how we normalize it, what our responses are, how we can support each other. I'm looking ahead now to when the peak is peaked and when society emerges into its new form. How can we have these conversations which they're not the don't worry, be happy conversations, but they are the be real, let's be human conversations. And I think there's so much merit in that.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm noticing a part that just wants to be really silly and make some sarcastic comment.
Sure. I know that part of you.
Yeah. I know you do. Yeah. Yeah, Derek, I think that sounds great. I love that you're doing this. And so, yeah, I want to challenge, whoever's someone who's listening to this that wants to take this on and to learn from Derek, to take what he's got and to do that in your own community, like however that looks.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we got to take advantage of you. And I mean that in the best way, right? Like take advantage of what you're putting out there.
Sure. Well, that's why I'm so grateful to you for being open to this conversation, because the more people that can hear it, the more people that can consider. It's if you've never done anything like group facilitation or bereavement group facilitation, it can feel like, oh, I don't know how to do that. But most people in our field, most mental health professionals, if they've had any group experience, they know how to keep the ball rolling, right?
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
you got 10 people, it's like, Joanne, how you doing this week, right?
Yeah.
John, how you doing this week, right? And okay, the topic for this week is the funeral, right? Who wants to
Yeah.
start with that? Ed, you're passing? Okay, no worries. Jane, you got something to say about the funeral? Go ahead. Right,
Yeah.
and you do a round of that, and then anybody want to comment on something that somebody just said? You've got your guidelines in place, confidentiality, no side talking, ask permission before you return to somebody's material, and then you really, really build a sense of community and support, at least for that 90 minutes of the week that people get to look forward to. I find in the groups in the IFS groups I run, when people develop a sense of safety, they begin to say things like, I haven't spoken for this part anywhere else. It's like, good. So it
Yeah.
does become a place where that our common humanity can support each other. Once we drop the social pretense, it's like, this is hard. Let's acknowledge that it's hard. How, in what ways is it hard, and how can I support you? And the willingness to bear witness to somebody else's suffering is one of the greatest gifts we can give each other as human beings. It's remarkable. The difference between being frightened and feeling like I'm crazy and alone, and being able to say I'm frightened and I feel like I'm crazy with somebody saying, I'm here. It's huge. And it's what we do internally when we listen to our parts. It's what we can do externally when we listen to other people.
I remembered the sarcastic thing I wanted to say. It's probably not even that funny, but I wanted to say, this part of me is like, this not even that funny. I was just thinking, what reminded me of it is just thinking of how good that would feel in a group, like how good it would feel, like just how good it feels to connect around whatever, like
Mm-hmm.
whatever we're talking about. It feels so good to connect and just be with each other. And I was thinking how funny it would be to be like not in an IFS support group, but like when someone's talking and be like, well, that's a part of you. Like, oh no, a part of you. And then it's like arguing about whether that's a part of you. And for some reason I thought that was really funny. It's probably not that funny, but anyways, that was what I was thinking.
You know what? You know what though? The sarcastic part, or the humorous parts, or the twisted humor parts, they're so helpful. They actually get us through times like this. And
Yeah.
people have an assumption with this kind of magnitude of distress that it's got to be all doom and gloom. And I take those parts very seriously that need to speak about that. And it's often the case that once that's been named, there is space for the sarcastic, for the crazy, for the dark humor. Like when I was in AIDS work, there was I worked at one point at the AIDS Committee of Toronto, and we'd go in, and there'd be the various groups that were there that evening, helping parents, HIV positive gay men in addictions, dealing with death. These various groups, and there was one that was GASP. I'd never heard of this one. I didn't know what the acronym was. So I said, GASP. What's GASP? And one of my co-workers who had AIDS said, oh, that's a support group for people living with pneumonia. And for a second, I thought he was serious for a second. It's like, he got me. It's like, yeah, okay, good. Yeah. So you need that.
Funny.
You need that. You need it, right? Otherwise it's like, if you can't find that, then you're more likely to drown. You're more likely to become burnt out, become overwhelmed. Like you've got to find those glimpses, I think.
Yeah. Thank God for our funny parts.
I know. But I was thinking about humor as you were talking. Some of the funniest, like crack you up funny people I've come across work in either the funeral business or in places like AIDS or, terminal or cancer. Some of the funniest people you'll come, like really twisted individuals. And there's a part reminded me that one Christmas Eve, when I was in Canada, I hadn't been in Canada very long, didn't have many friends, and I was working as a waiter. And one of the other wait staff, she was a stand-up comic, and she's like, "You're not doing anything for Christmas? Come to my Christmas Eve party. It's all comics." I'm like, "That'd be great," right? So I go to this. I've never met such bitter people. They're so bitter. They were like, "Oh God, the people that come and see us, you wouldn't believe the fucking things they laugh at. How sad are their fucking lives that they laugh?" I'm like, "Ooh, Christmas Eve with the comics. Ooh, like take me back to the people that work in cancer, right? They're fun."
I'd rather be with them. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
I volunteered in hospice at one point, in AIDS hospice. One of the nurses there I knew from the local HIV clinic. And so she worked with like death and dying all the time, like horrible death and dying. And I thought I'd been exposed again. So I went to have an HIV test. And she said, "So, why are you here?" And I told her about my sexual activity. And she said, "And were you a top or a bottom at the time?" And I said, "Oh, are you collecting data on this now to see if there's higher risk vectors for if you're a top or a bottom?" She's like, "No, I'm nosy." Sure. Yeah.
Well, one thing that does help us in this job is to be nosy. It makes us good,
Yeah.
right? Because we're good
Yeah.
listeners and curious. I call it
Yeah, but
curious,
she was just,
not nosy.
she was being nosy. You can call it what you like, but it had nothing to do with the work she was doing with me. She just
You know
like,
what it
"You were
was
top or
doing? It
bottom?"
was building. It was probably building rapport, and it was like helping you be less anxious and worried.
I like how you're supporting her nosy part. She was so fun too. She was this dominatrix who wore like bright red lipstick and bright red hair, and she was like intense,
Yes.
right? And working in hospice,
Yeah, good
just
for
like
her.
such an incredible heart,
Yeah.
So.
Mm. Thanks for hanging out today. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.